this is being recorded. And the reason that we're very sensitive about this is that this topic is a bit touchy-feely. This topic is where we're going to ask you to interact with us and be part of the conversation. And your participation, your courageous vulnerability is highly encouraged. So when we send out this recording, it will only be for the population in this meetup group. And Lori, if you just want to, in your conversation, just add to that, that would be awesome. Without further ado, let me introduce Lori. Lori has a master's degree in counselor education, is a certified mediator and national instructor for mental health first aid. She has worked in the field for the last 10 years with experience providing individual and group coaching, trauma and crisis education, and develops and delivers training and workshops to domestic and global audiences. She founded Empathic Communications, a business providing training, consulting, and coaching services for organizations around emotional wellness in the workplace and beyond. I don't know what more job seekers need than that emotional wellness and that total mental fitness. And so, Lori, I'd like to turn it over to you, and welcome to Colorado Career Connectors.
Thank you, Chelle, for that lovely introduction. I really appreciate it. And thank you for inviting me here today. And I just want to thank all of you for being here today and participating in this conversation. As Chelle said, we really do hope that today is not just me kind of lecturing at you. I have lots of content that I'm going to share, but that we can have real conversation around this, because the topic is, huge, and it is so needed right now that we have these conversations. So I'm going to pull up my presentation and we can get started. Can everyone see that? Let me put it into, here we go. Sorry. I've been working like this for a year now and I still have some technical challenges. It's not my forte. But again, thank you for being here today. So, when Chelle invited me into this conversation, I was really excited because burnout is a topic that I've been talking about a lot this year. As Chelle said, I work in the space of emotional wellness, and that's a really large umbrella. And burnout has been, particularly these last few months, just rampant, and something that workplaces have really started to recognize. So as we get started, I just want to show you what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be, the first part of this conversation is going to be about education and information. So sharing with you what burnout is, why, if you are a career searcher or in a career transition right now, how this might be impacting you, which you probably already know. And then some signs of burnout. And then we, at the end, really the last half, we want to talk about some prevention and management strategies. So today is about information and education. It's not going to be medical advice or treatment in any way. Really just want you to have an understanding of what we're talking about and hopefully be able to walk away with some tools, some tangible tools to take with you. If there is anything that comes up for you that you have more personal or individual questions about, please feel free to reach out to me at the end, and I'm happy to provide any additional resources or referrals that you might be interested in. And also, as we're going through this, I will be pausing and asking for any feedback that you might want to contribute. Also, we are recording this, so I only want you to be sharing what you're comfortable sharing and what you feel safe sharing today. And we are going to be having the chat managed by Chelle and Yvette. So please feel free to add anything in the chat that we can bring into the conversation if you don't want to add that verbally. Okay, so what is burnout? And, there's actually a lot of different definitions of burnout, and you probably have your own definition of burnout at this point. But the one I'm using is from the World Health Organization. And there's a couple reasons why I'm doing that. And the first is because they put this out in 2019. So when you think about that, that was before the pandemic. And the fact that World Health Organization was recognizing it at that point is indicative of what a large problem it was even pre-pandemic, right? So I'm going to show you some stats in a few minutes about how things have possibly shifted after the pandemic. So the second piece why I like sharing this definition is because they talk about this from, a workplace perspective. So that is really kind of the confines of their definition of it. We're going to be talking about it today from an individual perspective, but it's both. It's systemic and it's individual, right? So the systemic piece is so critically important to think about and understand, as is the individual, because the individual is how it's impacting us, right? And the systemic is, what's causing that? Where are those stressors coming from? And then the third piece I want you to look at is the bullet points. So these are the 3 dimensions that they're talking about that kind of categorize burnout. So what I say is the signs of burnout, really. How do you know if this is burnout? So the first is feelings of energy depletion or exhaustion. And the exhaustion is really that big piece. Like you're just feeling exhausted, both physically and emotionally, it can show up. The second is mental distance from one's job or feelings of negativism, that's a tricky word to say, or cynicism. And that can really show up as depersonalization. So really not feeling connected to your work, not having any kind of engagement, real lack of engagement. And also the cynicism is that real kind of pessimistic attitude. And it's not just sometimes you're feeling pessimistic or negative, which is completely natural, but it's chronic. It's kind of all the time, that's what you're feeling. And then the last piece is reduced professional efficacy. So that means, is that productivity? Are you able to be productive? Are you able to be effective in your work? So those are those 3 components that really make up burnout. And, what I also want to say from a general workplace perspective is, our workplaces are different. It could be a corporate workplace. If we're working from home, that's a separate workplace. If you're a full-time parent, that's a workplace, right? So this is, it's on a spectrum and it's a large scale problem. So
Lori,
here's some, oh yeah, Chelle.
I just wanted to see from the audience's perspective, by raise of hands, how many of you can relate to that chronic stress or that decrease in efficacy or that negative thoughts, right? While you're going through the job search. So really pay attention to what Lori has to say today. Thank you, Laura Lee. Thank you so much for everybody who's been courageous to put that hand up. This is why this topic is so important. Okay, Lori, I just wanted to get an idea from the participants.
Perfect. Thank you, Chelle. And jump in anytime. And please, everyone, I will be pausing to open it up too. So please feel free to jump in. Thanks, Chelle. And again, thank you all, for your participation and vulnerability today. So these are just some statistics that I thought were interesting, and they were published recently. So in March of 2021. And, again, we're still in the pandemic. We're just moving out of it. So we're going to be in recovery from this for a long time. These statistics are probably going to shift and change, but I thought it was just a really interesting snapshot right now. And the pieces that I just want to highlight out of this slide is that those last 2 bullet points, 53% of the respondents said that they're working more hours now that they are remote. That's a huge number, right? And then that last one, only 6% of people say they do not check their emails after work hours. So to me, those 2 pieces alone are a recipe for burnout, right? Chelle, did you have any comments or anything to add around this one?
I just feel like the clients I work with or those people that I speak with, so many people are that disconnection, and people are answering emails after work. And for working moms and working dads that have kids at home and homeschooling, that people are working more hours for less money, and that stress of being underemployed or really seeking something. How many of you can relate to that? Right, being underpaid, underemployed. And so we definitely, I appreciate this information, Lori. Thank you.
Yeah, you're so welcome.
Sorry, I was thinking underappreciated is one of them too.
Andrew, awesome.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
So how might this impact your job search or career transition? Now, you all can probably speak to this really well, so I'm going to open up this conversation here if anyone would like to chime in. You know, these are just a few pieces that I'm putting out there as far as how this can be impacting your career search. So, you know, the sense of overwhelm, financial concerns, right, can create a lot of stress around this. Lack of boundaries. So what do I mean by that? That can show up in a lot of different ways. But the last slide that we just showed, you know, the email example is one example of lack of boundaries, right? If we're not able to implement work boundaries from our home life boundaries, that's going to cause problems. And expectations. So when you're in a job search, I mean, there are probably a load of different expectations that people have around that, you know, how long it will take them to find a job. And then also, what are other people's expectations that might be impacting you? And then, of course, the emotional toll. I mean, the emotional energy that we expend in a job search or job transition is huge. You know, the amount of time and energy, and also, you know, if you're getting responses that aren't positive, you know, that really takes an emotional toll, that rejection. So really important factors that play into this. So, you know, Chelle and everyone else, please share other pieces that have come up for you that have led to burnout during a job search.
I'd love to hear in the chat from any of you what other factors are causing you burnout right now. This will really help, and your share might really help someone else. This is kind of not a tactical topic. So what else is causing you that burnout?
While people are typing, I'll pick up on what the previous slide said about cynicism and negativity, and how easy it is to get cynical. Pandemic stuff, job stuff, like all the stuff, it's super easy to get cynical. And once you're in that space, that headspace of cynicism, how hard right? It can lead to a spiral, and it is so hard to pull yourself out and find the positive. And so whether you're cynical about the current position you have or about the ability to find the next thing that is on your radar, once cynicism has its claws in you, it's really hard to recover.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Jennifer. It's so true, right? It is so true. It's so easy for us to get in that negative spiral. And we'll talk in a little bit about how to try to work through that, right? Hopefully how to try to prevent it. And if we can't prevent it, how we try to work through that.
Lori, we have some awesome comments from
Great.
the chat. Becky is saying that it's really hard to try to manage that schedule and responses and calendars and tracking applications, the overall organization of a job search. I hear that a lot from my clients. Laura Lee is sharing lack of focus, not sure what I want to do next. So I look in many different directions. Oh my gosh, Laura Lee, we should chat, because really focused clarity and vision is huge. Michelle is sharing in the job search, the inability to call it a day and walk away. And of course, rebounding from rejection. I think rebounding from rejection is one of the things I hear the most in burnout. And I've worked with a lot of different people that have been that groomsman or that bridesmaid or second tier so many times, is trying to keep that positive mindset. Plus one to Becky, when to call it a day. Okay, thank you so much. Lori, I think we can continue.
Great. Thanks everyone for your comments, and really appreciate your expertise in this, right? Because you're all having your own experiences. And so it helps so much to hear what those are, and we can talk through them and how they relate to what this content is. So, 5 stages of burnout. So the reason why I share this is because it's helpful for the awareness piece. So am I experiencing this? Oh, am I in one of these categories? And then we know what we can kind of do about that. So the first phase is called the honeymoon phase. And you think, well, how is there a honeymoon phase when we're talking about burnout? But when you think about it, if you're just starting your job search, for example, you might feel really excited and energized, and you're really into it and finding maybe great job postings that you're excited about, and just putting stuff out there, feeling that energy. It can also look like workaholism. So, we live in a culture that we are lauded, right? For, oh, I have worked 20 hours today or whatever that might look like. And so that's a real part of our culture too. And so we're often praised for that. So that honeymoon phase is, can really feel positive and energizing, but it's kind of then starts bleeding into the next phase, which is the onset of stress. Because if you keep working at that pace that you might be working in the honeymoon phase, then there's going to be stress that's coming along, right? So you probably feel a little bit less optimistic, satisfaction starts waning, and you might even have some emotional and physical symptoms that start showing up. And then we move into the chronic stress. So chronic stress is when the stressors are mounting up and they are not necessarily being addressed, and they're continual, okay? And chronic stress is really when we start showing more and more kind of physical symptoms. And if, I'm sure some of you probably know a lot about stress and how impactful it is to all of the systems in our bodies, right? So this is the point that we really want to try to stay away from. And as you see, as we hit burnout and habitual burnout, those symptoms just increase and the duration becomes more intense, right? So instead of maybe, a couple times a week, you're waking up with a headache, it could be every day, right? So that's what this can look like. Does anyone have any questions about this at all?
Or
Okay.
examples of how this is, like where you are right now in one of these 5 stages.
Oh, sorry, you're asking for examples? Yeah, if anyone wants to
anybody has
share.
examples of maybe where you are, like habitual burnout. My sister is a perfect example of that. So Becky, you're in burnout. Yeah. Who else out there is like that exhaustion, that cynicism that Jen was talking about, right? Thank you, Lori. I see your hand raised. And for those of you that I can't see, Daniela, Mickey, or Mikey, Lonnie, Lynn, I hope you're listening to this and aligning with it. Okay.
Thanks, Chelle. Yeah, and thank you for those of you that are sharing, because it is, and this is, again, incredibly common. Talk about, today it's incredibly common, but it's something that is really embedded in our culture. And so we want to look at this and look at the importance of recognizing the stages and how we can then manage it. So here are some examples of kind of how it can show up in real life. And there's a Maslow burnout inventory, which is kind of the gold standard self-assessment tool. And I can put a link for some of these pieces in the chat as we're finishing. But these are just some things or some bullet points to look at and see if you can relate to any of these examples in a more casual way. And I think that most of us can in some fashion, right? So what we want to do is notice this and then work to find what are the solutions and what are the methods that we can use to try to prevent this. Does anyone have any questions or anything to add around this? Chelle, what jumps out at you?
Oh my gosh, we have some really great and vulnerable comments.
Oh, wonderful.
Alan is saying, being told that there are more qualified candidates when you know you are qualified and probably overqualified. That happens a lot in the job search where you're either underqualified or overqualified. And from a physical perspective, it can cause, like when I'm really stressed, I get faster and faster, and people need to help slow me down because of that anxiety. Alan is saying that his hand shakes. Ambrose has shared that he's worked at places where no one wanted to be the first to leave. And Becky is, just commenting on that type of burnout. Michelle made some really awesome comments before as well. I want to, Tammy is saying, I relate to almost every item on this list.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Someone was mentioning earlier too, that piece about the concentration and being productive, which you see on one of these bullet points. And I'm just highlighting that because I think when we think about what chronic stress does to our brains and our bodies, right? Again, I said it impacts our whole system. And that piece right there, a lot of people don't realize that we are cognitively impacted by stress because of the hormones that are released, the cortisol and the adrenaline. And so when we're in a state of chronic stress and those hormones are still heightened because they're actually quite productive and protective, so they have a purpose. When they are activated, they help us, right? So typically they come up from a fear situation, something that's going to protect us. But when we're in chronic stress, what happens is instead of those hormones reacting and then coming down when that stressor is gone, they stay up here. And so then they impact our bodies and our brains in ways that affect all of these pieces, right? So our cognitive functioning, our physical functioning, and that the cognitive piece I highlight because our memory, our focus, all of that is impacted. And I think a lot of times people don't realize that. I have a lot of conversations with people where they don't understand that. Why can't I focus? Why am I being too distracted? Why can't I concentrate? And so when you're looking for a job, right, those pieces are really important. And so I say that to help you just understand it and also to have a little bit of self-compassion because we can really beat ourselves up for those things.
Lori, I just want to honor, Mimi had a death in the family recently, and she's saying that she has some chronic stress and she's just trying to get back on track. And so I think the content of where we're going is going to be super helpful to her. I also have a question in the chat from Jen that Jen is doing a lot of reading on mindfulness and body awareness, that the body is part of our mind and has a lot of information for us. What messages is your body sending to you? So that might be a question rhetorically that everyone on the chat thinks about. We're getting a lot of participation, which is awesome. And I want to make sure that Lori has enough time to really provide solutions for those of you that are having that chronic stress. And so just keep the chat coming and we'll do our best to just honor that. So Becky, your body's saying you just need to stop. Okay, I have remedies and so does Lori. So I will let Lori continue, but thank you so much everyone for your just participation so far. I think it's been really helpful.
Yeah, it's wonderful. It really makes the conversation so much richer. So thank you all. Thank you for sharing, these really personal pieces of yourselves. I'm honored and privileged to sit with that. So thank you very much. Yes, we are going to be now moving into that space of, okay, what are some strategies that we can be using? And this is a model that I use personally. I've shifted into coaching. I have a mental health background, which I utilize all the time, but I don't practice therapy anymore. I practice coaching work. And, I like to work in the prevention space as much as possible because if we can prevent, it's just so much easier and more helpful than if we get into the repair and damage control. Now, that's not to say that we can't repair. We absolutely can. But if we can catch it on the prevention side, even early intervention, it's that much more effective, right? And it takes less time as well. So prevention and management strategies. So there is a fantastic book called Burnout, The Secret to Unlocking the Stress Cycle. I don't know if anyone has read it or heard about it. It's written by two sisters, and they've also been on some podcasts in the last year with this incredibly relevant information that they're sharing. And they talk about completing the stress cycle. And they do such a brilliant job of explaining this, both from a science perspective and from a practical perspective. And so just to do a very brief overview of it, when we all have stressors every day, right? You know, and an example of that, maybe in your job search, you have just gotten a rejection letter, you know, so that's going to give you a lot of stress, right? So you've got this rejection letter, and at the same time, you're doing a ton of other things. You know, maybe you are homeschooling your children. Maybe you're trying to answer phone calls for another job that you're doing. Whatever that looks like, you've got a lot going on. And you just got this really hard news that's you have a lot of emotions and stress around. So what do you do with that? So often we just push it down, right? Because we can't deal with it, or we don't want to deal with it, or whatever that may be. That's kind of that happens all the time. But what we would ideally want to do is deal with that stress as soon as possible. Okay. So any stressors that you can deal with in the moment, great. If you can't deal with it in the moment, can you deal with it at the end of that day? Because when we don't deal with it, it accumulates, right? So when we talked about that chronic stress, that's what happens. So the sooner you can deal with your stressors, that is really a prevention method of going down the road to burnout. Okay, so they talk about these 7 components, or these 7 strategies that actually have evidence-based, they're evidence-based practices, meaning that there's a lot of research behind it. Okay, so I won't go through every single one of them just for time's sake, but one thing I do want to point out is breathing. We talk a lot about this, and we talk a lot about mindfulness, but breathing is something that you can really do in the moment that is physiologically helpful. It really does calm the central nervous system. And there's a lot of different breathing techniques you can do, but I just want to highlight, even just if you, let's say you did get that letter or that call that you had a rejection and you couldn't deal with it right then and there, even by taking a big deep breath in the moment and sitting with that and be like, okay, I'm going to deal with this in a bigger way later. But even that alone can help take you down a level. Okay. So I'm not going to go through every one of them, but does anyone have anything to add or to question or ask a question around this? Okay. Oh, I think, Chelle, I think you're on mute.
I was, thank you.
Okay.
Yvette put a copy of the link for the book in the chat. And Mikey says, finding a company that treats their staff well is really hard. So the other thing that helped me is just remembering the word pause. Yeah. That everything does not have to be done right now. You can pause, you can go for a walk. I teach a Zumba class on Tuesday mornings for any of you who would like to join to get that creative movement and that expression out. Dance, go to a workout, go cook. Lots of different ways to help with that stress.
Yes, absolutely. And the main thing is, excuse me, is that you do have to do something, right? If you don't do something, then it will sit in you. And, I want to also highlight laughter and crying. So those are 2, natural responses that we have. And those do help us complete the stress cycle. But the caveat to that is they can't be forced, right? I mean, they have to be real. We can't fake crying and we can't fake deep, real laughter. But if you're able to do that, like some people are criers, and that's great. I mean, it's a great expression if that's, what helps you get it out. Other people aren't, and that's okay. So again, another piece of this is going to be very individual to what works for you. And you need to find different methods because the same thing's not going to work every single time. Okay.
Just one comment, Lori. One of the comments is he goes to church every morning, so faith helps. Yes. I cannot even tell you, faith over fear is huge. And it doesn't have to be from a religious perspective. Just knowing that there is something bigger. I do a lot of work on that with my clients, and that faith over fear is a really good mantra that any of you can use out there as well. Okay, Lori, let's just do a time check. It's now 12:36, so we have about 24 more minutes.
Okay, great. So we're fine. I don't have a ton more slides. So what I would love to do is kind of at the end, open it up as well. So we'll go through a few more of these
Cool.
slides that we have. Thanks, Chelle. So that moves us into self-care, right? So again, those are those immediate pieces that you can do to work through the stress cycle. And now we're going to talk about self-care. And when I say the word self-care, oftentimes people kind of roll their eyes with like, oh yeah, you know, self-care. It sounds kind of warm and fuzzy, or, you know, I'm going to take a bath or go to the spa. And that could be part of it, but that's not really what this means. What self-care means is it's the actual practices and habits that we do on a regular basis, so consistently, to enhance and take care of our well-being, okay? And I break self-care down into 4 categories: physical, emotional, practical, and social, spiritual, okay? And you can see them broken down into different ways. This is the way I personally like to do it. So, you know, what does this look like? So some examples of it. So that physical is that movement, right? So we hear about it all the time, exercise, exercise. I like to see it as movement because exercise sometimes feels really daunting to people. And it can be anything, you know, like Chelle was just saying, it can be dancing, it can be walking, it can be just even getting up and stretching. You know, if you're in a day where you're on the computer all day long, just get up and stretch and move your body. You know, I've worked a lot in the grief and trauma field, and, you know, shaking, like we teach people to kind of shake things out. So there's a lot of ways that movement can be helpful. And again, it's an evidence-based practice. Nutrition, you know, what are you putting into your body? You know, that's really important. If we're eating kind of junk all day long, that's going to have an impact on how we feel. And sleep. Sleep is oftentimes one thing that people really miss. And I highlight this in almost everything I do. Yeah, because it's the foundation. Like if we, and we all know this, right? If we're not getting good sleep, it again impacts our whole being. So I always say to people, if you feel like you are burnt out, if you feel like you're moving into that space, take it back to the basics, you know, take it back to sleep, exercise, food, you know, what are you putting in your body? Hydration, you know, are you drinking enough water? So I won't go through every single one of these because it'll take too long, but the emotional component, we've talked a little bit about boundaries and self-compassion already. Gratitude is, again, an evidence-based practice. If you are able to get up in the morning and say, you know, even just one thing you're grateful for, it can really help you start your day in a better way. Practical, this is also sometimes something that people don't think of as self-care, but there's a lot of practical pieces you can put into place to help create good habits around self-care. Somebody was mentioning organization earlier, I think in the chat, around how it's so difficult when you're in a job search to be organized, and because you've got things going on all over the place, right? How are you tracking everything? So if you can create some systems and some routine, that can really help you with stress levels. And then that final is social spiritual. So Chelle, you just mentioned the spiritual component. And again, it doesn't have to be necessarily religious. For some people it is, that's great. But it also, you know, is nature, play, altruism and service, and relationships. So, you know, what are your connections? So Chelle, do you have anything to add or comment around this? Do you want to check the chat?
There's so many things in the chat. I just put some things out there. Keeping a gratitude journal is a very easy thing to do, and something where I've experienced in 12-step programs, not personally, but my family, and they are like, keep a journal of gratitude. I love, Jen stated, like, do the Taylor Swift to shake it off.
Yeah.
You know, join me for Zumba. Go and Michelle and others were talking about perspective. And when I was partnering with the CEO of Sonora Quest, he always would call them white wine nights to get perspective on lots of business issues. Volunteerism, I think, is huge, and something that my family and I did, and that a lot of my clients have done, is that service to others really allows you to feel like you're giving back. And in this pandemic and unprecedented time, I think it's very easy to find areas that are very safe, delivering food to others, helping with kids' homework, whatever it might be. But now we're in summer. Spirituality, being with friends, comedy clubs. I have a client who's a comedian as well as a diversity leader in the school district. So comedies are opening up again. Cooking, walking the dog, yoga, reading, nutrition, and sleep. So that's what I wrote down. And I'd love to see other comments from people in the chat.
Can I tell a story about volunteerism?
Sure, go ahead.
Do.
Oh, and I really like what Pat said about vitamin D from the sun. Absolutely. I live on the northern edge of civilization, so vitamin D is really important. When I was in a major career transition and really like leaving one industry for another, I did a lot of what I called holding the couch down, which meant like lying on the couch and maybe crying and taking a lot of long naps because I was not doing well. And my husband suggested that even if I was not gainfully employed, I could maybe get out of the house and do something for other people. And what I ended up doing is sort of looking at, okay, what causes are important to me? And I walked into the YWCA and said, how can I help? And it took a while, and because they have a vetting process for their volunteers, but I have a lot of skills, right? I'm wildly talented at things. But I was coming from a place, being a professor, where a lot of the things that I took for granted were really valued outside of my own realm. So I volunteered, funnily enough, in the YWCA's Employment Services Division for several months. And I edited people's business plans. And I did all sorts of stuff that was not, it wasn't hard. It was just lovely to be able to contribute. But you know what? They ended up hiring me part-time for 6 months because I did something really good. And then I had a job. And then it was a lot easier to get the next job. But I just volunteered basically to get off the couch. And it turned into something that, it wasn't going to necessarily be my career or put a ton of food on the table. But it made me feel better. And it made me see my skills in a totally new light. Like, I'm not afraid of public speaking. My boss at the YWCA was like, okay, so you're going to come to all the meetings with me and talk about this project because I hate talking in public and you can do it really well. And it was just nice to see, it was nice to be valued and to sort of put my toe in that way by volunteering. So it felt good and it ended up getting me a job. So go volunteering.
Yay.
Awesome.
Thank you so much, Jennifer, for sharing that. That's such an amazing example. And what it also made me think of was how important it is for us to do something, right? When you're in that space, and again, it's dependent upon what's going on with you, of course, but when you're in that space and if you can take action, how that can really shift what's going on with you. So thank you for sharing that beautiful example.
Do we have any other examples of volunteerism or ways that you have helped or ways that help you get out of burnout that might be the seed for someone else on this call to hear, to know that others are doing so that they can get involved with? Ambrish, would you share what you're doing from a mentorship perspective? Do you feel comfortable with that?
Oh yeah, completely. I'm volunteering. Actually, I'm a mentor at the Healthcare Business Women's Association. So I get an opportunity to work with different pods and some really talented people. And, it's really helpful to kind of work with somebody going through, something that they want to clear up. Maybe how do they manage up? Maybe how do they, how they can be more resilient. Everybody has their own topics and they get to describe what they want to lead. They lead the meeting every week, and we as mentors are just there to sort of listen and see if we can offer some help and guidance, and the rest of the team participates in that. So it's a really valuable experience, and that's one of the things I'm doing. And of course, I think the pandemic messed it up a bit, but our family was also serving food at the homeless shelter in Berkeley. So,
That's
Amazing.
beautiful.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Amber. So I really wanted him to talk about that because I know others on the phone have mentors or are mentors. They help coach baseball teams. They help coach different areas. Supporting others will always allow you to have that feeling of giving back. And so I highly recommend that. Thanks for bringing that up, Lori.
Yeah, of course. And it also, it helps us kind of get beyond ourselves, right? Sometimes when we get stuck, we can really stay in our heads and help. And it kind of goes down that hole that I think Jennifer was talking about before, that's like example with the cynicism. So being able to do something beyond ourselves can also be a really great strategy to be able to move out of this. So let's go through, I have my final couple of slides just around some other ideas. So we've talked about the self-care, and I talk about prioritizing it, right? And creating kind of a system around that if you can. So, scheduling it, tracking it sometimes can be helpful. You don't want to do it so it's overwhelming, but, really making sure that this is how you can kind of create the habit at the beginning. And anchoring, I don't know if anyone knows what that means, but I'll explain briefly. Anchoring is if you can attach it to another habit that you already have in your daily life. So example, if you're making coffee in the morning, drink one glass of water while you're waiting for your coffee to brew, right? Super simple, but if you can start doing those in these small ways, that's really how we create sustainable, healthy self-care habits. And shifting your perspective. So we were just talking about that a little bit with the service and the volunteerism. So I have a question that I'll put out there. Is complaining or venting helpful? What do you guys think about that? What do you think?
Hi, Lori. I'll speak on this instead of typing.
Oh, thanks so much.
Yeah, sure. I think it's helpful if it's done constructively and with the right people. I mean, you have to know who you can actually complain to or vent to, who's going to listen and be compassionate and understand and not just tell you that you're being ridiculous or whatever, so having some people that you can trust that can give you helpful feedback and constructive criticism when needed, but also if it's just a matter of, I just need to get this off my chest, lay it on me,
Great. Thank you so much. Yes, absolutely. So it really, we don't want to stay in that place, right? So yes, we got to get it off our chest. We have to acknowledge our feelings and our emotions for sure. If we don't do that, then that's where we get stuck. But if the complaining and venting is, again, kind of chronic, you see it, that's where you're going, it can become that cynicism, right? So, and I'm sorry, I didn't get your name. Becky, is that right? Yeah, Becky. So when, like what Becky was saying, if you have the right person to be able to share your emotions and feelings with, if they're able to give you some really good feedback, right? You can have that honest, authentic conversation. That is helpful. So thank you for that. And then again, kind of these reframing techniques as far as when you are in that space, kind of taking a step back. There's looking at yourself from 40,000 feet. That's one strategy that people use, and saying, okay, how can I look at this situation in a different light, right? And sometimes that's really hard. But if we can do that, if we can catch ourselves, that can be incredibly helpful. And then of course, what can you control, right? Our worlds have been very out of control these last, 15, 16 months. So focusing on those things that we can control and that we can manage, and that we call it planned problem solving. Does anyone have anything to add with shifting your perspective?
It reminds me, Lori, of that Brene Brown video on empathy versus sympathy.
Yeah.
And if we think of saying things like, well, at least you have your health or whatever, that actually isn't a very helpful perspective shift, right? Like trying to put lipstick on a pig isn't terribly helpful. But this notion of what can I control? And one of the things we can control, at least to a certain extent, is our thoughts and our emotional reactions. Like we can practice resiliency. And this is a really good, it's been a year and a half of practicing resiliency. And so we get to continue to do that, I think, and to say, okay, what is within my control? And, you know, if I'm falling into cynicism, how do I bounce out of that? What is a useful perspective for me on the job search, on my current role? What is within my control?
Yes.
Thank you, Jen. Laura Lee, you had something to share too.
Yes, thank you. There's a speaker that I listen to, and he talks about as an employer, he has his employees come to him with opportunities instead of problems. You know, that, you know, his assistant will come in and say, we have a brilliant opportunity. And then just having that way of thinking of it as rather than, oh, this is a bad thing. Oh, this is a possibility for something we haven't thought of.
I love that. Thank you.
Thanks for sharing. Absolutely. Sorry, Shelley, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Oh, no, I was just saying, I think that's great.
Fantastic. Well, I'm going to, just for time's sake, I'm going to move over here to finish up this last slide, which is, you know, reducing exposure to stressors where possible. Now, we can't always reduce that, right? But sometimes you can. And again, that might be around setting boundaries or having, you know, really clear communication around what it is that's not working for you or what your needs are. Seeking out connection. So again, authentic, positive relationships. That kind of goes back to what we're talking about with Becky around, you know, knowing those people that you can go to for different things, right? In an authentic way. Not everyone can fill our buckets in every single way, right? So we have different relationships that give us different things. So, and also I just want to highlight on this one, you know, connections, social interactions are incredibly important, which I know that we've all felt this year in one way or another. And again, it's a spectrum for people, you know, some people require more social interaction than others, but we all need it. We're wired for it. We're wired for connection. So, you know, there's been a lot of research recently. I don't know if anyone has read Vivek Murthy's book around loneliness. There's been a lot of research around loneliness recently and how loneliness actually has a more detrimental impact on our lifespan than smoking cigarettes. You know, so this is a really important factor about cultivating connection. Meaning, so what gives you purpose? That kind of goes into that spirituality bucket. And then compassion for yourself and for others. You know, when we can view through a lens of compassion, again, genuine compassion, it really makes everything a bit easier. Like it makes it easier for us to shift our mindset. It makes us easier to manage our emotions. And at the same time, it's really hard to do. You know, it sounds very simple, but it's not always easy. So does anyone have anything else they would like to share around this or anything that we've talked about today as we're kind of finishing up our time together?
Lori, I wanted to jump in on some things, and I know you're part of Positive Intelligence right now as well. And Yvette has been in the Positive Intelligence, and there's a few other folks on the phone, Ambrish, that have been through this program. Reducing boundaries and having empathy for yourself and others during a time like this is very hard to do when that inner critic in your head is telling you that you're not good enough or that you're incompetent or that you can't be a speaker, that nobody wants to hear from you, that you're a burden when you're trying to network with people. A lot of how I help my clients, and I know, Lori, you're going through this now, is through a program called Positive Intelligence to really quiet that inner judge that we have and increase and activate new neural pathways in our brain so that we come at life with that new perspective and from a wisdom or sage perspective of really positing and seeing the positive and joyous side of life. So I have a client currently who is a nurse at a cancer center, and she is going through a lot of judgment and a lot of that burnout like we're talking about. And just the changes by her putting in some of these, reducing exposure to stress, building in more boundaries, and seeking out that connection. That's what I hope each of you will do through our next meet and greet next week. And Lori, if you want to stop sharing, Yvette is going to put up the information for the meet and greet next week. So awesome. Recognize reverse resilience. So if Lori and I can help you, whether it's me through positive intelligence and, you know, Ambrish and Yvette and a few others on Jen, actually, as well, have been through positive intelligence. If I can help you, or if we can help you with that, please. This is why I invited Lori today. And we're really here. We're not therapists. I am not a therapist. Now, Lori is. But a lot of times I get called the career therapist because I go really deep with my clients to get them out of that inner critic and that judge. And so I just wanted to say and kind of put a plug in for positive intelligence and see how you think that this program helps, and then open it up to anyone else for any comments on any of your content today, Lori.
Well, thank you all so much for having me. And if there are questions, or you would like some resources or anything that's coming up for you afterward that you want to reach out to me, please feel free to do that. I'm going to write my information in the chat right now.
We are recording this, and we also will be sending out contact information for Lori and me in a newsletter that you all will receive after this conversation.
So, Lori, I accidentally muted you. Okay.
Oh,
Can you repeat the name of that book on loneliness?
So it's by Vivek Murthy, and I can't remember the name of it. I can't remember if it's Connectedness, but let me just look it up quickly for you.
I will include that in the follow-up email as well.
Okay, great. And I have a couple of other people that I included on my sources page that I'll add in there too.
Awesome. Thank you, Lori.
Is
Any
it
questions for
together?
Lori? Or honestly, if we can help you with anything, most of my clients do see therapists. They go to psychotherapists. Get help for your anxiety. Get help for your burnout. And if Lori or I can help you, we sincerely care about your success, because from my perspective, I want you to amplify your awesome and live abundantly, not in scarcity. And Lori is out there. There's others that are part of this community. Get an accountability partner with whom you can talk to. Be part of those communities and start laughing. I mean, I know that life is way too short. And if you're interested in coming to my workout class, please do, you know, whatever we can do to help you. Any final comments in the chat? Yvette, thank you for putting that book in the chat.
Yes, thank you so much, everyone. I just added a couple of other great authors that that specialize in burnout. And again, if there's anything that pops up for you, please feel free to reach out. I'm happy to help in any way that I can, or just be a resource if that's helpful to you. And Chelle, thank you so much for inviting me here today into this conversation with this wonderful group. I'm really privileged to be here.
Big hands up for Lori. Thank you so much, Lori. We really appreciate it. I think this group has gotten so much out of this, and we all know how that feels to be burned out. So our goal for you, burn bright instead of burning out. Again, if we can help you at all, life is very short. Live it to your best, have abundance, and I hope to see you at the meetup next week. And if you are interested in those ally tickets for Women Tech, this is there's over 500 speakers this week. It's an amazing opportunity for 3 of you to get into that conference. Let me know. Or if you'd like to find out more about working with Jen and I, starting in late August for K through 12 or professors or academics, let us know. She and I are both certified positive intelligence coaches, and we want to be able to help you live better. Okay. Thank you so much, everyone. Please
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, Lori. Thank you, Chelle.
Thank you. Cheers.
You're welcome.
Bye.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye-bye.